In case you haven't guessed, I'm David Greenwood, and I'm the first in a series of presentations, 20-minute presentations, that the Historical Society has created. And basically, it's going to be, the program is set up in different parts of the village, so it's on location. And the reason for that is there's such an ambience. And how many of you have never been on the street before? Okay. How many of you have grown up in the area and know the street? Okay, virtually everyone. We keep hoping that we'll have new people coming in to learn more about the village. So what I'm going to be talking about is probably something you already know. Backstory is, what was the name of the street before it became Alden?
Hogan's Alley.
Hogan's Alley. And the reason for that, any guess?
What?
Okay. The reality was this connected with Sandinona, the main estate. And in the 1870s, 1880s, the workers for all the estates were by and large, the first generation of workers came from Ireland, because they did all of the farm work, the housework, everything you could imagine. But no one wanted to live near them. Can you guess why? They were Catholic. And the bias at the time was part of the routine. So what this street ended up being was an access to Sandinona, the estate. So a lot of those workers ended up living in houses that were provided and or buying property and creating their own house eventually. The second wave that came in were from where? Italy, absolutely. And the reason for that was that the second generation of Italians that came here ended up taking the same menial jobs, but they brought something else to the community that was incredibly important. And you can see it across the street. The stonework. So most of the Italians came here because the architects and designers who were doing the buildings for the main part of the village needed stonemasons. So they literally went to Italy and encouraged families to come to work as stonemasons. And you can walk through the village today, and any time you see stone like that, guarantee an Italian family lived there. An Italian family built it. And that tradition was carried on. Now, the last time I did a presentation about Alden Place, the number of names, and I should look to my notes so I don't want to forget anyone, but I was fortunate enough to be able to, let me sit down, to interview the most amazing assortment of people. And most of them you would know, but I'll give you the names. Okay, special thanks to Safari. We'll all know the name Safari. Second name, Ratuno. Most of you know the name Ratuno. Third name, DeFazio. These are names of families that came here initially because of the stonework connections and or other connections within the community. And I was fortunate enough back 15 years ago for Charlotte Ratuno and her sisters to sit down and talk to me, and the others as well, about their recollections of what it was like growing up on the street. And because this was an access road to the Sandinona, and it was the second generation of Catholics, the Irish who had been here by that second generation ended up migrating into the village proper because they became the pharmacists and took over all kinds of businesses within the community because they were industrious. So they had the property here, and they ended up renting it to the Italian families because of the Catholic connection and the church. Now, what's interesting about that is anyone on the street for that second generation, Italian was the language of the street. So regardless of what your background was, Italian, and we have wonderful, wonderful stories from individuals who were not fluent, but could communicate in Italian and understood it because of their connections with it. And that's also part of what makes a community real. So it's not just the big names, the estate owners, it's the people who did the work within the houses. Now,
Could I?
yes, please.
I can tell you the Italian names almost all the way up and down the street. Panazzo, Magnarella, Malella, Massarone, Shara, Manzi, Seppi, Cardinal, Massarelli, all up and down the street. When I didn't live here, but my aunt and uncle did. And it was such a neat, pretty street. My daughter now says, it looks so awful on that street, but again, it'll become pretty again sometime. But there were all these neat lawns and gardens, and they made wine because there were grapevines.
And wonderful traditions. And what I was able to do, which you just heard about, is I did documentation, each of the houses and the recollections, who lived in the houses. Like the Rotunos were very good with it. And also it depends on the generation of who moved out, who moved in with it, and the connections. So this is all part of the local history. And the other thing that's so interesting, if we look at the census of 1900, and this is just an example, and the way the census was done in 1900, unlike today, the census takers would walk up and down the streets, so it wasn't so alphabetical. It was who was in the next house, and the next house, and the next house. So if you look at it and you have a location site, you can figure out who was in the houses. And what's interesting, you get on this street, and it goes from New York, New York, to Ireland, then Italy, 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 all the way down the list. And it's literally the people on the street with that connection. The other information that is so important is, let me get back to my cards. Hogan's Alley. What does that come from? Anyone know? Why was it called Hogan's Alley? It was because the first popular comic that was in newspapers back in the 1880s was called Hogan's Alley. And guess who lived in that comic strip? All Irish. So it was all vernacular and fun and witty. And the one character that became so hugely popular that sold newspapers was called the Yellow Kid. And you may know that comic strip, but very, very popular. You think, wait, because he looks Asian. But in point of fact, he was part of the crew of the kids in the area and neighborhood. So what happened was, with all the families here being Irish, it got the nickname of Hogan's Alley. So that's where it came. And then, by 1920, they were embarrassed by that association, so the name changed to what? Alden Place. And do you know where Alden Place comes from?
A woman name.
It was a woman's name, but it was also, Alden means old friends. So this was the street of old friends, Alden Place, and that's why it stuck. And now, where we are, what do you know this building as?
Grape shade.
The grape shade, depending on your generation, yes.
My social studies teacher said
In 1925, here's the name you'll know, the Manzis bought it and set up their own restaurant, and it became known as the Grape Shade. And why did they call it the Grape Shade?
They had arbors out there?
Because it was an arbor, and they'd make their own wines. So people would gather with the grapes, drinking the wine, and Manzis became famous for it. It was a destination. And then, in 1997, the name changed to Roberto's. So some of you may remember it as Roberto's. And then now it's Mora's Kitchen. But they all go back. This was 2016 that it became Mora's Kitchen. But the names and the associations help to identify the generation. So it's always been a destination for good food, good company, and good relationships. Checking my notes.
What about the clubhouse?
Oh, and the clubhouse, just down the road, there is a building you'll recognize, stone on the bottom, wood at the top, and it was referred to as the clubhouse, but it started off as a blacksmith shop, and it very soon became taken over by the Italian groups in the area, and the bottom level became the clubhouse, and upstairs is where the Italian society was. Now, who was in the clubhouse and who would be in the society? The clubhouse, mostly men. So what was in the basement area or the bottom level of it? Pool hall. So the men would be there and they'd be smoking. Who would be upstairs? The women. They had the society, they organized it. And we have so many wonderful photographs in the building and the associations with it, all local history.
And the name for a time?
And the name, thank you.
The Mussolini.
The Italian
Mussolini
society.
building.
Very short
And
time.
yes, until it no
late
longer became
1920s.
appropriate.
Late 1920s, the name changed from the Italian
Wasn't
society to the
politically correct
Mussolini's.
anymore.
And the reason for that is Mussolini had the gift or the burden or the baggage of unifying the entire country. So it didn't depend on where you were in Italy. Italy had been very much separate communities. And depending on where you lived in Italy, you had different dialects. And if you were from Sicily and you went up to Milano, you'd have a hard time understanding them. And what happened here was, by and large, if you were from the same area, Cosevetti, if you were from there, by and large, you would have the same dialect. So most of the people here had that Italian dialect with it. The DeFazio building is the one down the street that has a stone and the two clubs on it. And that's where the Mussolini Society ended up being renamed, and very quickly that changed. The other, James Ware, was an architect in and around Millbrook, and he's the one who designed Halcyon Hall, the ladies, the girls' school. And he wanted it to be in stone. He was one of the first ones to go to Italy and get the masons to come to work on the building with it. And you think about the stonework here, it's pretty extraordinary. We take it for granted because it's all around us, but so many people from other communities come in and they look at it and say, look at that, look at that, look at that. And one of the things we do with our local history group in the public school is the kids will come around and identify which buildings they think are Italian. And they start looking, stonework, 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 stonework. And then they research it because we have all the records on them. And they come back and do the reports. So it's a way of having every generation take responsibility or an understanding for the community. And that's really very, very special. Something else that we take for granted, which at the time, Franklin Merritt insisted on. Now, we all know the name Franklin Merritt. Why? Because he's the one who went from Hart's Village area and bought a farm area and laid out what became known as Millbrook. And why did he buy up the estate? Because bingo, he knew the railroad was coming through. So he bought up all the property before anyone else knew that the railroad was coming through. So what he ended up doing was establishing what became Front Street and then Merritt, the different avenues. And this avenue ended up being the access road where a lot of house servants lived and or workers on the estate. But it has something that's really very, very special. Can you guess what it is? What does this road, Merritt, and Franklin have in common? Most of you are standing on it. Sidewalks. When you think about it, today we take them for granted, but at the time, that was revolutionary. Because sidewalks, why did they have sidewalks, by the way? Why were they so important?
Roads were so dirty.
What was in the road?
Mud.
And horses,
behind.
yes. So this was an opportunity for people to walk and not be in the road, not be in the traffic with the horses. And a lot of the people who lived on the street ended up also taking care of the horses for the other estates. And there is access, something else that was really very special for the students on the street. They would walk across, and what's on the next street over?
Yes, and
Nobody over there on this car?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Your
I
lights
have
are on.
permission to park.
your lights are on,
your
Nan.
lights are on.
Nan, your lights are on.
Oh,
You can't park for your life.
Just doing you a favor.
Thank you for that. Thank you. That's special.
You're welcome. Park any way you want.
Yeah. Thank you. So the sidewalks became very, very special because of the horses. And this was an innovation that Franklin Merrick incorporated into the village, and it ended up being here as well. Now you go to other areas, other communities that are at the same age, they don't all have sidewalks, or if they do, it may be only one, not on both sides of the street. And that's part of what we take for granted for it. All those details were part of the baggage and fabric of what became the village of Millbrook when it was incorporated. Let's see, what else?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
I've always heard that the influx of the Italian stonemasons was Dietrich, and it built with all the stoneworks there.
Yeah, and Dietrich, can you guess who designed?
Was that another Ware?
Yeah, it was
Oh,
Ware
okay.
influence, and that was the responsibility of the area, and that was the main incentive. And what Franklin Merrick did, think of the way the streets are set up to take advantage of what becomes the Hitchcock estate, with the gateway and so on, and the incredible stonework with it. And we have lots of stories of people who worked doing the stonework and then lived in the boarding houses in the area during the day, or at weekends or at night when they weren't doing the stonework. But there are so many stories of people who worked at the estates doing the stonework. And one of the things that the Dietrich estate has, which was really revolutionary at the time, was a bowling alley. And to have a bowling alley, wait, who has a bowling alley? Well, the Dietrich estate had it, and the Hitchcock estate has it today. So if you go there, it's just amazing. And we interviewed children of people who worked in that bowling alley. And the amazing thing is, the story that we found, you don't even think about it, is that the bowling alley was designed so that there were places for these young boys, mostly, to lie on their stomach over the pins, so that when the pins got knocked over, they would reach down, get down, set them up, and then get back above. So if you can imagine a parent having your child there, how many hours a day, how many days a week, but the pay was wonderful for it, because it was an opportunity to help support the families. And we've got those interviews. Let's see what else is here. Oh, and some of the interesting background stories. Louis Daniele, or Daniele, came to America from Fondi, F-O-N-D-I. Fondi is the area, and because of the Fondi connection, that's a lot of the dialect, the Italian dialect is from that region. He came as a 15-year-old to America. He started working as a gardener, first by raking, first big break came in 1939 when he was hired to provide labor and landscaping for the World's Fair. You think 1939 World's Fair. And he was able to hire and do so much with it because it was a showcase for the Americas. His business now running out of his family home on the corner of Merritt Avenue, and that was quoted in 1996. The Safaris, or Chifari, first became stonemasons and plasterwork in Millbrook in 1906. Rodrigo and his brother Adolfo, after a few years, Adolfo decided to go back to Italy. He couldn't stand it here. And his sons, James and Ernie Rodrigo and Adolfo, Adolf founded R.C. Safari Sons. From 1977 to the present, the business has continued with Safari Sons Skip as president. So that's basically plans rewind me in the time.
Good finish. 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank
so
you.
that's basically the overview for it. But I encourage you, when you walk around the village, notice the signs that we have, the museum and the street signs. And that was a project that we used with our students to help familiarize them with the community and the backstory. So we utilized what is the second language on the signs. Italian. We were the first one in this country to do that. What was the one that would normally be used? French. Normally be French. All over New England is going to be French. So we were the first ones for the Italian. And the Italian families in the area helped with those translations for it. So it's part of the legacy of the
And also you've got the Millbrook, the Bellagio, the Millbrook.
And my better half name,
I was just going to say, if people have access to that, is it still available?
I think you can get it from Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful video interviewing a lot of the Italians who had lived in the area in Millbrook and talking about what it was like growing up. And they're just delightful. Some of them are still alive and some aren't, so it's a great thing that they were able to get it done when they did. But that's another great resource.
Who donated the land for the school? In 1961, the new high school.
Oh, it was the expansion, it was Bonteque, up here at the top.
At the top of
Yeah,
the
that was the Bonteque family connections, and there were others as well.
Wing Estate.
Was
that
Wing.
part, all
It
that
was
land
original.
was part of Wing?
It was all originally part of Wing.